from the Common English Bible. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I seek security for you so that things might go well for you? Now isn't Boaz, whose young women you were with, our relative? Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. You should bathe, put on some perfume, wear nice clothes, and then go down to the threshing floor. Don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he is lying. Then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Ruth replied to her, "I'll do everything you are telling me." So she went down to the threshing floor, and she did everything just as her mother-in-law had ordered. Boaz ate and drank, and he was in a good mood. He went over to lie down by the edge of the grain pile. Then he quietly approached, uncovered his legs, and lay down. During the middle of the night, the man shuddered and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. She replied, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread out your robe over your servant, because you are a redeemer." He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have acted even more faithfully than you did at first. You haven't gone after rich or poor young men. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do for you everything you are asking. Indeed, my people, all who are at the gate, know that you are a woman of worth. Now that, although it's certainly true that I'm a redeemer, there's a redeemer who is a closer relative than I am. Stay the night, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I myself will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until morning. Then she got up before one person could recognize another, for he had said, "No one should know that the woman came to the threshing floor." He said, "Bring the cloth that you have on and hold it out." She held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and placed it upon her. Then she went into town. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, "Now, how are you, my daughter?" So Ruth told her everything that the man had done for her. She said, "He empty-handed your mother-in-law." He said, "Don't go away empty-handed to your mother-in-law." "Sit tight, my daughter," Naomi replied, "until you know how it turns out. The man won't rest until he resolves the matter today." And then from Matthew 7, 7 and 8. "Ask, and you will receive. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. Whoever seeks finds, and to everyone who knocks, the door is opened."
Okay, so we are in Ruth. We're in chapter 3. And I wanted to just do a real quick recap if any of you have not been around for this beginning. We did chapter 1, I call it famine, displacement, and death. Chapter 2, I call God of coincidences with quotation fingers. I'm calling this one seeking security. I'll call it chapter 4, fulfillment, but Kenzie might change that next week. I have no idea. Or I've put him into a box where he has to call it fulfillment himself. Oh, you know what? My mic isn't on. I just realized that. Oh, hey, that's way better. Okay. If you missed all that stuff before, just ask somebody beside you who can hear really well. So we're during the time of the judges, and that's code for things are bad, okay? The people of Israel are a bunch of sort of scattered tribes. They don't have any consistent leadership. They've come through out of slavery. They've come through across the Jordan. They're into the promised land, but they're in a situation where they just keep falling into the same patterns of idolatry and violence. And so that's what sets us up for this particular situation. Naomi's family left their home in Bethlehem because there was a famine. They tried their luck in Moab. But while there, Naomi's husband died, as well as her 2 sons, just after they had married Moabite women. Naomi heard the famine was over, so she decided to go back to Bethlehem and told her daughters-in-law they should go back to their original families for their own stability. But Ruth clung to Naomi, promising to stay at her side no matter what. Naomi reluctantly returned with her, telling her home community that she was returning to them empty. Ruth decided in chapter 2 that she was going to utilize this practice of gleaning, which allowed the poor to harvest the very edges of the field to have enough to survive. And it just so happened that she was gleaning in the field of a righteous and very important man named Boaz. He had heard of her story of commitment to Naomi, and he went the extra lengths to protect her and provide her with food. When Naomi heard what happened, her spirits were lifted, and she praised God for these wonderful coincidences. So as chapter 1 ended and chapter 2 began, Naomi was deeply depressed and distressed with no real hopes of a meaningful life. So it was Ruth at the beginning of chapter 2 who made this plan, because Naomi was essentially despondent. She was empty. She said, "Don't even call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara," which means, I'm stuck. What was it? Bitter. That's what it was. Thank you. I didn't write that part down. Call me bitter. So Ruth makes this plan. Now, going into chapter 3, Naomi seems to be revived by this news, by this support from Boaz, by Ruth's hard labor to bring in enough food, at least for a little while. And so Naomi, being re-energized by these coincidences, has this renewed energy, and she knows that she and Ruth cannot survive for very long just picking up the edges of the field. Picking up the edges of the field is a way to keep the poorest of the poor from starvation. It is not something that is meant for the long term. They have met a very generous landowner that has offered a great deal of assistance, but Naomi and Ruth both know that they will barely be able to survive on assistance. They cannot thrive or live truly meaningful lives on assistance. So Naomi devises a plan to move from assistance to long-term stability. And it seems that her plan is to get Ruth and Boaz together to set up a situation in which Boaz will need to marry Ruth. I'm going to be as delicate as I can over the next 15 minutes. In that time and place, marriage was one of the central components for long-term stability for women. The culture was not in any way set up for single women to thrive. In fact, it was quite prejudiced against single women. And in that male-dominated culture, most women were basically at the mercy of men to make decisions and call the shots. But Naomi sees an opportunity. Naomi sees an opportunity working within that culture, but around at the edges, to take the initiative to secure her and Ruth's future stability. One of the commentaries that I read titled this section, "How Not to Leave the Initiative to the Man." I liked that one. How not to leave the initiative to the man. So Naomi tells Ruth to get really cleaned up, put on nice clothes and some good perfume, and then go down to where Boaz has been threshing the grain. Now, it's common during harvest to celebrate at the end of a long, hard work day. They celebrate with food and drink. And so Naomi knows that he will have had his fill of food and drink. He'll fall asleep on the threshing floor. So Ruth is to go down, to pull the blanket off his feet and to lay down there. Then wait, she says, and then wait until Boaz tells you to do something and do whatever Boaz tells you to do. Okay, so we don't know exactly what Naomi's thinking, but it seems pretty obvious that she is setting things up so that Ruth and Boaz will be in a situation and that something might happen in the middle of the night that would cause them to need to get married. Are you with me? If you're not, ask your parents. Okay? Now, if we look at this story and we all get a little uncomfortable and we say, that's inappropriate, maybe wildly inappropriate, and we're maybe in our heads we're like, well, that was like a really long time ago, so maybe the culture was different back then. You'd be wrong. This is just as scandalous an idea as it would be today. It's a dramatic story with a whole lot of tension. So we pause and we go, is Ruth really going to do this? How's Boaz going to respond? Will they? Won't they? The storyteller is like wringing their hands, and she's just like thrilled because she's got us on the edge of our seat. This is like crazy kind of a story. But before we get to that conclusion, I want to sit with this discomfort and the strangeness of the story. Because what's interesting is that there are really deep connections between Ruth and Boaz's story and some other stories that happen earlier in Scripture. So follow me for just a bit. Genesis 19, Lot. Lot is Abraham's brother. Lot and his family settle in Sodom and Gomorrah. The city of Sodom and Gomorrah is burned to the ground from fire from the sky. And Lot and his family barely make it out. And if you remember the story, Lot's wife turns around at one point while they're fleeing. And does anyone know what happens? She turns into a pillar of salt. Yes? Okay. Lot, being like having a whole bunch of trauma and PTSD about living in any kind of city, decides to settle in the mountains away from everybody. So all that's left is Lot and his 2 daughters. And Lot's daughters say, this is not dignified for us as single women to be childless, to be alone out in the middle of nowhere with no men, no prospect of carrying on with meaningful life. So Lot's daughters scheme to get him drunk, to sleep with him, and to get impregnated by their dad. And that's exactly what happens. Now, the eldest daughter has a son. His name is Moab. Ring a bell? Ruth is from Moab. Ruth, the Moabite from Moab, as they say multiple times in the story. Genesis 38, Judah and Tamar. Judah is a brother of Joseph. You remember Joseph's story. Joseph's long saga throughout Genesis of being sold into slavery and then rising up into power and then rescuing his family essentially from famine. Well, Judah's one of the brothers, and there's this interlude in the middle of the Joseph story which is completely out of nowhere that surprises anybody who's read through that story. Judah has 3 sons. His first son gets married to Tamar, and his first son dies before they can have any children. And as was practiced to keep the dignity of the woman, of Tamar, Judah is supposed to give his second son to marry Tamar, and then they can continue their family. The second son also dies before they can have children. So the third son is in line to marry Tamar, and Judah says, yeah, sure, once my youngest son is old enough, then I'll marry him off to you. Judah, being scared that there's like some sort of curse going on with this Tamar or something, like doesn't want to keep losing sons, refuses to let that happen. Moves somewhere else, doesn't let his youngest son get married to Tamar. Tamar sees this injustice and has very little recourse. So Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute. Judah comes across her when he's going into town. He proposes her and sleeps with her. Several months later, once it's obvious that Tamar is pregnant, Judah realizes what happened, realizes who this woman was, how he is connected to her, and Judah says, "This woman is more righteous than I am." Tamar has twin boys. One of the children is named Perez. We'll see at the very, very end of the book of Ruth that Perez happens to be an ancestor of Boaz. We look at Naomi's plan and go, "Whew, that's scandalous." It is nothing compared to their ancestors. These are the stories we don't read about in Sunday school. So I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard them. This brings for me it all the way back to the beginning of the series when I described the book of Ruth as a very human story. You might say, "I have never met a human who's been through anything like this." Some of you may have. The reality is that the Bible includes all sorts of people with all sorts of situations. And much of it is focused on the people who have been pushed down to the ground and out to the edges. And people who have been pushed down to the ground and out to the edges are in desperate situations with very few options. The women in these stories are stuck in a deeply, deeply male-dominated culture, and they have very little power, very few options to effect change when it is needed. There are structures in place, and we've named that there are structures in place. There are God's public policies, if you will, to help people receive the dignity they deserve, like the gleaning. But if the men in charge refuse to do their part, what are the women to do? In these stories, the women take extreme personal risks to find a non-traditional path to secure their future and assert their dignity. Now, we don't need to look at these and necessarily say that what they did by definition then was good and right and just. The Bible doesn't actually say necessarily that the actions they do are good and just and righteous, although Judah claims that Tamar is more righteous than he is, so maybe it's a grade of righteousness. The Bible doesn't give like a moral and ethical definition to these actions. What the Bible does is it says these things happen. These things happen particularly when humans find themselves in impossible situations. So, as one commentator put it, where options are limited, people take advantage of whatever possibilities are available, and they pray that God will see them through. Theirs is of necessity a theology of survival. In short, the story of Ruth should not be read as an endorsement of every aspect of its ending as the desire of God for all times and places. Remember, this is the time of the judges. God is working with people at their worst. So actions that take place in this context are not necessarily what God intends for all people for all times. That's not how we should read this. Instead, it is a story of women making a way out of no way, enabled by God behind the scenes and by other faithful people epitomized by Boaz. This is the story of Naomi and Ruth, of Tamar, of Lot's daughters, a story of women making a way out of no way, enabled by God behind the scenes and by other faithful people epitomized by Boaz. As I start to see the deeper realities behind these stories, I start to soften a little bit to my typical snap judgments when I see people making decisions that I think are wrong or immoral. That's not to say that there's no such thing as right and wrong. That's not to say there's no such thing as moral and immoral. But I certainly feel compelled through these stories to slow down my snap judgments about others and their decisions. Recently, I was part of an orientation for the leaders and the partners in the Steps to End Poverty program in Mound Ridge. And we read through an orientation sheet, and one of the statements stuck out to me, and I had to read it several times because it helped me in that moment to start to understand that the behaviors and decisions that I see as wrong or unethical might have something deeper behind them than I understand. So we read, sometimes smoking cigarettes is a way to stay off harder drugs. Sometimes drinking soda is a way to not smoke. Leaders know they're unhealthy, expensive, etc., and they carry the shame already around these topics. As we journey forward through our human experience in the world, I hope that we will be able to practice holding back our judgments to get to know the full human story of those around us. And beyond that, I hope that we will take the time to reflect on how the structures that you and I benefit from keep other people at the margins. Another commentator wrote, "Every society creates the equivalent of the childless widow." Every society creates the equivalent of the childless widow. We can think about who are those people in our society now. Each generation, continuing the quote, each generation has a list of circumstances that disqualify a person from truly belonging to the community. Often, these marginalized people choose indecent actions to provide for their present and secure the future for themselves and others. Often, these marginalized people choose indecent actions to provide for their present and secure the future for themselves and others. Because I keep getting information from EMU, from Eastern Mennonite University, I came across the story of Lema Gaboe, who studied peacemaking at Eastern Mennonite University at the Peacebuilding Institute. Lema grew up in Liberia, and when she was 17, a civil war began. And for 14 years, Liberia was stuck in a civil war. Lema had seen the women in her village and girls be physically and sexually abused. She saw the young boys be taken away into the militias and given guns when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. She worked as a social worker for a time, helping to reorient boys that they had been able to get back into the community from the militias and reorient them to life. But the war persisted, and the corruption persisted. So she coordinated Muslim and Christian women's groups to get together to begin to protest the war and to call for peace. Their movement became so important and heard so well that she was called as a representative to come to the Capitol and to be part of these peace negotiations with the president and with the militia forces. When the peace talks stalled and the men in the room were about to get up and leave, Lema and her constituents barricaded the doors and said, "You will not leave here until we have a peace agreement." When the security forces came to take Lema and her constituents away, the women stood up and threatened to disrobe in front of everyone. Now, in our culture, that would be okay, shame on you. In that culture, the shame and the curse rested firmly on the men who saw an unclothed woman. She was threatening to disrobe, she and her constituents, and thereby placing all of the shame and the curse on the men in the room who would be viewing an unclothed woman. The men sat back down. They hammered out a peace agreement. The corrupt president moved on. They held democratic elections. A civil war shot has not been fired in 23 years. Will we continue to stand in judgment over people making indecent choices in impossible situations? Or will we hold back our snap judgments and get to know the human beings behind those stories? And will we work ourselves to undo the structures that have put and kept those people in the margins to begin with? Back to the story. Ruth does exactly what she's told. She goes to Boaz and lays at his feet, uncovering his feet. Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night, startled by this woman at his feet. Now, this is where she does not listen to Naomi, because Naomi told her to do whatever Boaz says. Ruth gets right to the point. Boaz says, "Who are you?" And she gets right to the point, and she says, "Spread your cloak over me, for you are a redeemer." Now, we might assume, based on the immediate context, that this is a sexual advance. And actually, according to Hebrew, there would be reason for that. Uncovering someone's feet could also be understood as a euphemism for uncovering someone's genitals. So uncovering someone's feet and then asking the cloak to be spread over her might be considered a sexual advance. But in the broader context, it becomes clear that Ruth is actually doing something different. Spread your cloak over can also refer to marriage. And Boaz earlier commends Ruth for seeking shelter under God's wings. And the word for cloak and the word for wings is the exact same word in Hebrew. It's that edge thing. It's that thing that reaches out and covers over something. So if it's talking about a bird, it's a wing. If it's talking about a human, it's the cloak. It's the edge of the cloak. So Boaz commends Ruth for seeking shelter under God's wings, under God's cloak, and Ruth says, "Spread your cloak over me." If you want to fulfill the blessing that you just gave, not just a well-wishing, but if you actually truly believe that I have sought shelter under God's wings, then why don't you embody that? And then Ruth refers to Boaz as a redeemer. And this is an important concept, an extremely important concept in Scripture. Redeemer is a noun that in the Old Testament refers to one who rescues a family member from ruin, or specifically a relative who takes on the responsibility to pay off one's debts or buy back from slavery. In the most basic sense, we can think about redeemer as someone who claims what is rightfully theirs. So when we lead the bike buses through Mound Ridge, if anyone is wearing their helmet when we get to school, we give them a token, and the token is for a donut at the grocery store, or for a boba lemonade at the Hub, or for chips and queso at the Mexican restaurant. And so we give them the token, and they go to the restaurant and they say, "I want what's rightfully mine, please." That is, they're redeeming, right? They're redeeming their coupon. They're redeeming their token. And that's the essence of it, is that the redeemer is one who sort of reclaims and pulls back in what has gone astray or what has been claimed by another. So when someone has been claimed by poverty and debt and fallen into slavery, the redeemer is the one who reclaims that person or that thing. This is how we understand Jesus as redeemer. God sent Jesus to reclaim what is rightfully God's, reclaim human beings created in God's image who have fallen under the power of sin and death, who have been claimed by sin and death, and Jesus is the Redeemer, the one who reclaims. So Ruth is asking Boaz to claim this right, this position that he has. As a distant relative, he is responsible for being the Redeemer. To rescue Ruth and Naomi from poverty. And the way to do that is to marry Ruth. Ruth is proposing to Boaz. She is proposing marriage to Boaz. Again, Ruth and Naomi have refused to wait for the man to take the initiative. They have taken the risks to secure their future. Now, Boaz's response is one of awe. He's amazed by Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi. He says, look, at any point, Ruth could have gone after a younger husband that would be more suitable for herself so that she herself could be secure. But she proposed to Boaz because he's related to Naomi. Thereby, that marriage is not just securing Ruth, it is securing Naomi as part of that bigger family. So Boaz says yes. Aw. Boaz says yes. But, like any good romantic comedy, there's a catch. There's another Redeemer. And he's actually more closely related to Naomi's family than Boaz is. He is technically the first in line to marry Ruth. Whew. How is this crazy story going to end?